I spent nearly 2 decades waking up beside a man who would not look at me, sharing a roof with someone who moved through the house like a shadow that had no warmth left in it. And I believed that silent distance was the full price of my betrayal, until the day a single medical question tore open a truth far older and far more devastating than anything I had imagined. When I retired from teaching after 31 years in the classroom, I expected nothing more from my routine physical than a pat on the back and instructions to take more vitamins. Yet I found myself sitting in a pale examination room, watching dust float in narrow beams of sunlight, while a physician in her late 40s scrolled through my chart with a tightening expression that made my pulse race. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, when she asked my age and work history, but when she lifted her eyes and asked whether my husband and I had maintained a normal, intimate life, the words struck like a hammer to the chest, forcing me to confront the truth I had buried for years. My mouth felt dry as I admitted we had not touched each other in close to 2 decades, and the doctor's silence stretched so long that I felt myself shrinking into the chair, ashamed, confused, and unprepared for what would follow. She explained that prolonged emotional and physical deprivation could affect the body in ways most people never consider, from hormone imbalance to immune dysfunction. And as she spoke, memories I had tried to lock away began surfacing like wreckage from a sunken ship, reminding me that the stillness in my home had not begun in old age, but on a summer afternoon when my only child left for university, and I made a choice that would fracture my life beyond repair. When our son moved away, the house became unnervingly quiet, not with the peaceful silence of rest, but with the echoing emptiness of two people who had lost the rhythm of each other's presence. And I realized how little my husband and I spoke except about groceries or bills or the weather. We had married young, believing love alone would be enough to carry us through decades of responsibility. Yet the years smoothed us into polite strangers who shared memories but not desires, routines but not dreams. I was teaching literature at a small school, grading essays late into the night, when a new instructor arrived who carried a spark I had not seen in years, someone who spoke passionately about art and beauty and noticed the parts of me that had long gone unseen. His laughter was easy, his presence magnetic, and before I understood what was happening, I found myself waiting for brief encounters in hallways and lingering conversations over coffee that filled a space inside me I had forgotten existed. I knew every step toward him was wrong, yet the warmth of being seen felt like oxygen after years of emotional suffocation, and I convinced myself that my small secret could not truly harm the life I had built. But secrets grow heavier the longer they are carried, and when the truth finally revealed itself in the most public, humiliating way imaginable, the man I had promised to love forever chose a punishment far colder than anger, a life sentence of emotional exile that would stretch across the years like an endless winter. The day everything collapsed began with what I thought was a harmless lie about a work commitment, a few stolen hours by a quiet lake where I imagined I could breathe freely. Yet fate has a cruel way of exposing hidden sins, and when my husband and son appeared before me, the look in their eyes erased any illusion of escape. The drive home was suffocating, each mile thick with shame, and when we reached the house, my husband spoke with a calm that terrified me more than rage ever could, demanding the truth and offering me a choice that felt like a verdict. Either I walked away with nothing, destroying the fragile world our son knew, or I stayed and accepted a marriage stripped of all intimacy, a public performance of unity masking a private void. I chose to stay, believing that endurance was redemption, but I soon learned that living beside someone who refuses to acknowledge your existence is a far harsher punishment than solitude. Nights passed with him on the couch and me alone in the bed we once shared, the wall between us invisible yet impenetrable, and each morning we put on our masks for the world, smiling at neighbors and coworkers while our home remained frozen in silence. I told myself this was justice, that suffering was my penance, yet I did not know that the real cost of my actions would not fully reveal itself for many more years. Time continued forward, carrying us through milestones that felt hollow, watching our son graduate, marry, and build a family of his own while we stood side by side pretending to embody stability and devotion. Friends praised our endurance, unaware that the affection they admired was nothing more than muscle memory, and I felt myself shrinking into the role of a woman who had forfeited the right to hope. When our grandchild was born, a small spark of connection returned as we shared stories and laughter over video calls, and for a brief moment, I wondered whether years of patience had softened the ice between us. But that fragile hope shattered when a careless remark exposed the truth our son had long suspected. He accused us of living a lie, of suffocating under the weight of appearances, and in that moment, I understood that our quiet endurance had not protected him as we believed. It had only taught him that love was something to be endured rather than shared. His words lingered like a haunting melody, forcing me to question whether staying had been an act of loyalty or fear, and whether clinging to the remnants of a broken marriage was kinder than releasing us both from its grasp. When a new decade arrived, and my body began to feel heavier with fatigue and unspoken sorrow, I sought medical advice only to discover that the years of emotional deprivation had left traces deeper than I ever imagined. The doctor's concerned expression, the sterile hum of machines, and the images on the screen revealed something that should not have existed. Scars from a surgery I could not remember, a chapter erased from my mind, yet etched into my body. Confusion spiraled into terror as fragments of memory returned, nights blurred by medication, a dull ache I dismissed, a period of despair so thick I could barely breathe. And suddenly, I felt the walls of my carefully constructed reality begin to crumble. When I confronted my husband, his reaction confirmed my worst fears, and the truth he revealed shattered what little remained of my sense of self, exposing a secret he had carried alone for decades, a choice made while I was unconscious, driven by betrayal and humiliation that I had inflicted upon him. The weight of his confession was unbearable, forcing me to confront not only the consequences of my actions, but the irreversible loss that had occurred without my knowledge. The revelation that I had once carried a child not born of my marriage, that its life had been ended without my consent, tore through me like a storm, leaving grief, guilt, and horror in its wake. My husband's pain was raw and undeniable, yet the enormity of what had been taken from me left me questioning the boundaries between justice and cruelty, between protection and control. Our confrontation was cut short by a sudden tragedy, news that our son had been gravely injured, and in that moment, every personal grievance vanished beneath the terror of losing the child we both loved. The hospital corridors echoed with frantic footsteps and whispered prayers, and when a blood transfusion revealed an impossible truth about his parentage, the fragile foundation of our family collapsed completely. Questions that had never been asked now demanded answers, unraveling a history I had never fully known, exposing betrayals that predated my marriage and reshaping everything I believed about myself, and the man who had devoted his life to raising a child not biologically his own. When our son finally awoke and spoke the truth he had carried in silence, the pain in his eyes reflected the burden of years spent guarding a secret that would have destroyed the man he called father. Watching my husband crumble under the weight of this revelation was the most devastating sight of my life. For in that moment, I saw not the cold stranger he had become, but the heartbroken young man who had once believed in forever. The knowledge that our entire history had been built on layers of deception left me feeling like a ghost in my own story, unworthy of forgiveness, unsure of my place in a family defined by secrets. Yet despite the fractures, love remained in unexpected forms, in the son who insisted that shared years mattered more than blood, in the daughter-in-law who offered compassion instead of judgment, reminding me that while the past cannot be undone, the future still holds choices. As days turned into weeks, I watched my husband retreat into himself, his silence heavier than ever, his gaze distant as if searching for a version of life that had never existed. He spoke of letting go, of carrying on for the sake of our children and grandchild, choosing routine over confrontation, endurance over release, and I realized that our fate had come full circle, returning to the same fragile arrangement born of pain and obligation. We stood together in public, embodying stability, while privately existing as two people bound by history, yet separated by truths too heavy to bridge. I learned that some endings do not arrive with dramatic finality, but with quiet resignation, a slow fading of what once was into something unrecognizable, yet enduring. Even now, I wake each morning with the weight of everything we lost resting on my chest, knowing that my life will forever be defined by the choices I made and the secrets that followed. I no longer seek redemption or reconciliation, only understanding, a fragile peace built from acceptance rather than hope. The truth has stripped away every illusion, leaving me face to face with the consequences of a lifetime shaped by silence, regret, and love that endured in ways I never expected. This is not the ending I imagined, but it is the one I must carry forward, step by step, into whatever remains. The weeks after the hospital ordeal passed in a strange haze, where time seemed to stretch and collapse at once. Days blurring into each other as I moved through the house like someone borrowing a life that no longer felt like her own, watching my husband perform his role with mechanical precision, while avoiding any moment that might invite emotion or truth. He rose early, made coffee, folded laundry, and spoke only when necessary, and when he did, his voice was stripped of warmth, not from cruelty but from exhaustion so deep it had hardened into indifference. I found myself studying his face when he thought I wasn't looking, noticing the lines grief had carved into him, realizing that the coldness I had once feared was not hatred, but the final stage of pain that had burned itself out. Each night I lay awake listening to the faint sounds of his movement in the next room, aware that I had become a witness to the ruins of a life we built together, a structure still standing but hollow, and I wondered if staying was courage or cowardice, if endurance was loyalty or simply fear of being alone with the truth of what I had destroyed. Our son's recovery was slow but steady, and when he finally returned home with his family, the house filled with noise and movement that felt both comforting and unbearable, as if joy itself had become a reminder of everything we had lost. I watched my husband laugh softly with our grandchild, a tenderness in his eyes that made my chest ache, knowing that love had survived even the most devastating revelations, transformed but not erased. The child's innocent questions and bright curiosity were a living reminder that the future still held possibility, even when the past felt like a locked room with no key. And in those moments, I felt both gratitude and guilt so strong it left me breathless. I understood then that love is not always about possession or certainty, but about showing up, about choosing to care even when the heart is fractured, and that perhaps the greatest tragedy would be to let bitterness erase what remained of the bonds that had shaped our lives. Despite this fragile peace, there were nights when the weight of memory pressed so heavily on my chest that I felt I could not breathe, when I replayed every decision, every moment of silence, every lie that had paved the path to where we now stood, and I wondered whether forgiveness was something I had the right to seek. I began writing letters I never intended to send, confessions addressed to no one, trying to understand myself through words, trying to make sense of a life defined by longing and regret. In those pages, I confronted the woman I had been and the woman I had become, realizing that neither was entirely good or bad, but simply human, shaped by fear, desire, and the longing to be seen. The act of writing became my quiet rebellion against despair, a way to claim my voice even when no one else seemed to hear it, a reminder that my story did not end with the mistakes I made, but with the choices I continued to face each day. As months passed, my husband announced he needed time away, a journey not to escape responsibility but to find clarity in solitude, and when he spoke, his tone was calm, resolute, carrying a finality that left no room for argument. I watched him pack his suitcase, each folded shirt feeling like a chapter closing, and though he promised to return, I sensed that whatever came next would not resemble the life we once knew. His departure forced me to confront the silence I had long feared, to sit with my own thoughts without the shield of routine, and in that solitude, I discovered a fragile strength I had never recognized before. I began walking in the mornings, feeling the air fill my lungs, reminding myself that I was still alive, still capable of change, still deserving of peace even if I could never undo the past. When he returned, something in him had shifted, not toward reconciliation but toward acceptance, a quiet understanding that our connection had transformed into something neither of us could define, yet both were willing to carry forward for the sake of the family we still loved. We spoke honestly for the first time in years, acknowledging the pain without trying to fix it, recognizing that some wounds do not heal, but simply become part of who we are. There was no dramatic resolution, no declarations of renewed love, only a shared commitment to move forward with compassion rather than resentment, to honor the years we had shared without allowing them to imprison us. In that moment, I realized that closure is not about erasing the past, but about learning to live alongside it without letting it dictate every step. The seasons continued to change, each one marking another quiet milestone, another reminder that time moves forward whether we are ready or not, and I found myself learning to appreciate small moments of beauty, a warm cup of tea, the laughter of my grandchild, the gentle light of dawn breaking through the curtains. These moments did not erase the pain, but they softened its edges, allowing me to breathe again, to feel something other than regret. I began to understand that life is not a single story but a collection of moments, some heavy, some light, all woven together to create something uniquely ours, and that even in the aftermath of loss, there is room for growth, for forgiveness, for the quiet courage of continuing. Looking back, I see now that the greatest lesson I have learned is not about love or betrayal, but about truth, about the power it holds to destroy and to heal, to shatter illusions and to offer clarity in their place. I have learned that silence can be as harmful as deceit, that secrets grow heavier the longer they are carried, and that facing the truth, no matter how painful, is the only path toward genuine freedom. Though my life will always bear the marks of my choices, I no longer define myself solely by them, choosing instead to embrace the possibility of becoming something new, something more compassionate, something willing to face the future with open eyes. There are days when I still feel the weight of everything we lost, when the past whispers in my ear and reminds me of the life I once imagined. But there are also days when I feel a quiet gratitude for the chance to keep moving, to keep learning, to keep loving in whatever ways I can. I no longer seek absolution or understanding from others, finding instead a fragile peace in accepting myself, flaws and all, recognizing that my story is not finished simply because it did not unfold as I had hoped. In this acceptance, I have found a sense of freedom that had eluded me for so long, a freedom born not from forgetting, but from remembering and choosing to move forward anyway. Now, when I stand at the window and watch the world pass by, I no longer feel like a ghost haunting the remnants of a life left behind, but like a woman who has endured, who has faced the truth and survived it, carrying both sorrow and hope within her heart. I know that the path ahead will not be easy, that the shadows of the past will sometimes follow me, but I also know that I am no longer defined by them. I am defined by the choices I make now, by the compassion I extend, by the courage to live honestly. And in that knowledge, I find the strength to keep walking forward, one quiet step at a time. The story of my life is not one of perfection or redemption, but of resilience, of learning to live with the consequences of love and loss, of finding meaning in the spaces between what was and what might still be. I carry my memories not as chains, but as reminders of how deeply I have felt, how fiercely I have loved, how bravely I have endured, and in doing so, I honor both the past that shaped me and the future that still awaits. This is where I stand now, at the intersection of regret and hope, choosing each day to move forward with grace, even when the road ahead is uncertain. And so I continue, not seeking to rewrite my history, but to live fully within the present, embracing each moment as it comes, trusting that even in brokenness, there is beauty, even in sorrow, there is strength, and even in endings, there is the possibility of new beginnings, waiting quietly to be discovered.